A few months ago, I made a short video called "Can Bowser Take Off His Shell?" While that video on its own is fine, I kind of rushed it for the sake of content, which I probably should have saved for later use given my track record, and didn't go over everything I possibly could have. I prefer to be thorough with the topics I cover, so I want to go over this again in much more detail, hence the title, Leaving Almost No Shell Unturned. Before we begin, there's something important I need to establish. Because the Koopa species as a whole and Bowser's part of the species share the same name, for the sake of simplicity, I'll be calling Bowser's part of the species the Koopa race and all others the Koopa species or Koopa clan. With that said, let's begin. I'm going to start this off in a bit of a weird way by defining what a species is. Trust me, this is important and won't take long. If you want to skip this section, the timestamp is on screen and in the chapters. If you look up the word species, the most common definition you'll find is a group of organisms that can potentially interbreed or mate with one another to produce viable fertile offspring. This is known as the biological species concept and is very simple compared to how scientists view the term. Due to the handful of ways scientists have gone about trying to better analyze and classify species, whether it be by appearance, genetics, habitat needs, reproduction, and so on, this has led to the word species now having over 70 definitions, all of which are applicable depending on how they choose to go about identifying them. So how is this at all relevant? What I'm saying is that I don't think the Koopa species as a whole follows your average species definition, given how vastly different the established members of the clan can be in a multitude of ways. And we can't say or don't know for absolute certain how a majority of the species reproduce. One of the possible definitions of species I believe the Koopa clan better follows is a class of individuals having common attributes and designated to a common name. So why was that important? It's due to the fact that most arguments in favor of Bowser being able to take off his shell stem from Koopa Troopa's ability to do so. While understandable without much thought, there are a few flaws with this line of thinking, one being the species difference I mentioned earlier, but much more important is their difference in design. Now, I don't think I need to point out every single biological difference you could identify at a glance. The main thing we're going to focus on is the plastron, which is the underside of a turtle's shell, or front in this case. For Koopa Troopas, the plastron covers the entirety of the chest and abdomen and connects to the carapace, the back of the shell. The same applies to all members of the Koopa species with shells like Troopas. Take notice of how the area where their arms, legs, tail, and head come out of have gaps and or rims that are visible at all times. This is not the case for Koopas like Bowser. Their plastron only covers the chest and abdomen and does not connect to the carapace. The space in between is their actual flesh. This, I'd argue, is one of the biggest indicators that the Koopa race cannot take their shells off, as it would make no sense given their design. If they were like Troopas and others, their limbs and tail wouldn't be properly meshed with the areas of the shell they come out of. Another thing that proves they can't take off their shell are a few moments from Bowser's inside story. Harking back to my original video, I want to expand on what I said there. When the bros fix Bowser's back, the entirety of the back of his shell is shown to be the reacting area. This wouldn't have been the case if Bowser was like a Koopa Troopa, due to their backbones being completely separated from the shell. With that, we can conclude that Bowser's shell is more like that of a regular turtle's, whose shell is a part of its anatomy as its vertebrae and ribs are fused to the carapace. There's also another moment from this game I missed. After clearing the energy hold, Mario and Luigi stimulate Bowser's body so that he can do the body slam. This results in his plastron being shown as the reacting area, with him commenting, "Feels like power is building in my abs." As straightforward as this statement is, this is actually a localization change. In Japanese, Bowser says, "I can feel power surging from within my body." While his plastron may not be his abs exactly, the fact still stands that a part of his shell was the reacting area when his body got stimulated, further proving it's a part of his anatomy. I also want to fix a mistake I made in the original video. I said fixing Bowser's back and increasing his flexibility is what gave him the ability to bend his shell, completely forgetting that he could do so earlier in the game with the Shy Guy attack and even earlier in Super Mario Galaxy, the latter of which I showed. The spike ball actually refers to him gaining the ability to move around on his own while curled up. This is made even more clear when you consider that in Galaxy, he has to jump in the air and spin to build momentum before rolling, and with the Shy Guys, they were pushing him. Yeah, that's what happens when you rush a video for content. You miss something that would have strengthened your argument. Well, that and you make mistakes. Hi, Editing Lone here. There's actually another thing from this game I missed, but to be fair to me, this is from the remake and its website. There's an x-ray of Bowser that shows his vertebrae and ribs. If you compare his x-ray to a human's, you'll notice that a human's bones in that area can be seen from the front and back, as the bones curve around creating the rib cage. On Bowser's, however, there is no front side to his ribs, as they only follow the curvature of his carapace, further proving that Bowser's anatomy when it comes to a shell is like that of a normal turtle's. Another thing that proves that his shell is connected to his body is Cacoletta, or rather Bowletta. When Cacoletta possesses Bowser, she alters his physical appearance. This included changing his mouth, eyes, hair, horns, and replacing his plastron with a pair of breasts. The final point I want to address is again related to the design of the Koopa race's shell, more specifically its design when they go into them. Most people likely think of this design, where the plastron covers the entire bottom akin to other members of the species. Some of you might call me crazy for this, but this shell design doesn't make any sense. This is going to get a little complicated, so stay with me. The shells Bowser can equip in RPG and Inside Story all look like this. I'll talk more about these later. Even though his shell looks like this when he goes into it, this design doesn't make any sense if he were actually able to wear these. As I pointed out earlier, Bowser's plastron is separated from his carapace and only covers his chest and abdomen, with the space in between being his own flesh. He wouldn't be able to wear these shells as they go against his design. And the more I think about it, the less the modern design of Koopas while in their shells makes sense. The main consensus I've found as to why this happens is due to the plastron stretching, which is an understandable answer if you don't think about it too much, but that's not me. In order for this design to work, his plastron would have to stretch far in all directions around his arms, leg, and tail hole, and a decent amount of his body mass would also have to go into the shell, or be pushed back, you know what I mean. I feel like that alone isn't the most convincing argument, but I'd say the inconsistency of said design is. Remember how I said the other members of the Koopa species have gaps or rims that are visible at all times? There are some versions of his model where his arm and leg holes are just gaps as they should be. But something I noticed is that in the original Nintendo Switch Parental Control video, every hole in Bowser Jr.'s shell has a rim that would be visible and don't mesh with his shell at all like the other members of the Koopa species. Even worse, in the new version of the video for the Switch 2, only his head hole has a rim, which doesn't make sense, seeing how that would also be visible on the Koopalings, given most of them don't have anything covering their neck. All this proves to me is that the modern version of the Koopa race's design while they're in their shells are incorrect. They all should look the way Bowser's does in Double Dash in the original Inside Story, probably the only games that got the design right. With all of that said, I believe there's no doubt that Bowser, Bowser Jr., the Koopalings, and any other member of the Koopa race do not possess the ability to remove their shells akin to other members of the species due to it provably being a part of their anatomy. As for the rest of this video, I want to spend it addressing just about every viable counter-argument that was mentioned in the original video or elsewhere, seeing how this is the definitive edition. The counter-argument brought up the most was the gear from Super Mario RPG and Bowser's Inside Story, seeing how Bowser can equip various shells. Of all the arguments to come, this is the most understandable, and pretty easy to debunk as one of said games disproves this notion. As I mentioned earlier, Inside Story has two moments that show parts of his shell as the reacting area when his body gets stimulated, those again being his plastron for his abs and carapace for his back. If his shell weren't attached to his body, they would have done an x-ray showing a normal spine, seeing how his backbone would have been separated from his shell and looked like a human spine. As for his abs, instead of showing his outside, they would have shown him as a muscular system diagram whose abs are being stimulated, not his supposedly disconnected plastron. This alone is more than enough to prove that gear across all of the games is just a gameplay mechanic. No piece of clothing or accessories alters the appearance of any character despite its description or being completely different clothing than they would normally wear. If we were to take this argument to its logical conclusion, in Inside Story, Bowser shouldn't have been wearing any of his armbands or had any teeth in his mouth because he doesn't start the game with any equipment besides his shell. I don't think I like the implications of that. Same goes for Mario and Luigi. They should have only been in their overalls because that's all they start with. No gloves, socks, or shoes. This same logic can be applied to the rest of the RPGs or just about every RPG game outside of Mario. Hell, it's even worse in Super Mario RPG's case because Mario starts the game with absolutely nothing. He should have been butt-ass booty naked.
You aren't wearing any pants!
This ends now, or I'm going to have to come over there. Don't think I won't.
No. Stay over there. I'll take over the world another time.
Look, I believe I've said all that needs to be said about this. More than 2 seconds of thought would have been enough to realize that this argument doesn't hold any weight. Just because I said it was the most understandable doesn't mean it's not dumb. This next point is very brief and has to do with the dry form. Neither the Koopa race or species dry forms can be used to determine whether or not Bowser can take his shell off. Dry bone shells seem to be treated as a part of their anatomy despite the fact that their shells weren't when they were alive. This same logic would then apply to Bowser and can't be used to argue either side. Next to the description of the Bowser shell item in Mario Kart Double Dash and Mario Kart Tour, Double Dash states, an awe-inspiring giant shell. As it careens down the road, slamming and ramming into carts, it's the very image of Bowser himself. This is easy to explain as it's simply a metaphor. What's being said here is that the shell represents Bowser as it wreaks havoc on the tracks. Nothing here proves that the shell is Bowser's own shell that he wears, especially when you consider that Bowser's shell isn't the item's real name. Its original Japanese name is just Bowser shell, nothing possessive. As for Tor, it states, this big old shell on loan from Bowser will crash any carts it hits and keep on going. It can only be thrown forward. Obviously, the main takeaway is the on loan part. Now, you could take this for how straightforward it is. However, the biggest problem with this statement is the design of said shell. Remember what I said earlier about the Koopa Race's shell design. While yes, the shell does look like Bowser's while he's in it, it would be impossible for Bowser to wear and looks as if only someone with a Koopa Troopa-like shell could wear it. This just goes to show that the name Bowser's shell is not meant to be possessive. It's called that because it looks like Bowser's shell. Another thing about this statement is that the shell being one of Bowser's own is not the only way to interpret it. Something we're shown in Odyssey is that Bowser is capable of creating constructs that look similar to a shell, so it could just be that. Speaking of Odyssey, let's talk about clothing. It's believed that because Bowser's clothing go behind his back or under his shell, however you want to put it, that he either must be able to take the back of his shell off or that it's an entirely different shell with clothes attached. I already explained earlier why Bowser taking off his shell is completely impossible due to his design and anatomy. While there's no directly stated answer to this, you could safely come to the interpretation that Koopas just know how to design clothes that fit them in that manner. I know this isn't a Mario example, but you can look at the IDW TMNT comics to get a good idea of this. A lot of people were mutated into a variety of different animals and people learned how to design clothes for all of them. A really good example is when Raphael gets arrested and, while in jail, wears a jumpsuit that doesn't go over his shell, similar to how Bowser would wear one. Finally, I know some people might bring up the recent alternate costumes shown in Mario Kart World, but as I said earlier, there are 2 moments in Bowser's Inside Story where parts of this supposedly disconnected shell are shown to be a part of his anatomy, so that's that. If anything, my Inside Story arguments are probably the strongest of all the ones I've presented. That's really all I have to say. Keeping it short and sweet, Bowser can't take off his shell. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, comment your thoughts down below and subscribe to keep up with the channel's content. Until next time, see ya.